hurts, or maybe in some cases you kind of start, you begin to lose all sensation with the hand. It's yes, and you literally have to pry your fingers off. That's right. It because they are in a way frozen to that tool or frozen to whatever that thing you're holding on to. They just and you just have to sit there and rub your hand till the feeling returns and get some circulation back. That's how old Eleazar was with this sword. It just he was so working so hard and so at it that it just his hand and the sword became one, whether he wanted it to or not. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. The troops returned to Eleazar, but only to strip the dead, basically, uh, to, to reap the plunder. Because, hey, let's go, let's see what the dead left behind. They're not going to be using it anymore, and probably their relatives don't want it either, and who knows? That was right or wrong. That was kind of one of the spoils of war. If you wipe out the enemy, you can go back and take whatever they had with them. And it's very interesting. When Eleazar was battling the Philistines, apparently it was Eleazar against the Philistines all by himself. But when it came time to take care of the plunder, oh, then the troops came back. Oh, yeah, Eleazar, we'll help you out with that. Thanks, buddy. Well, next to him, verse 11, was Shammah, son of Agi, the Hararite. When the Philistines banded together at a place where there was a field full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them. But Shammah took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck the Philistines down, and the Lord brought about a great victory. You get something about these individuals. During times of intense battle, when your life is on the line, the soldiers got scared. Most of them, anyway. Can't really blame them. I feel the same way. But for these three individuals, if they were scared, they didn't even show it. Or it was the furthest thing from their mind because they were in there, they were in the battle, they were there to fight. And that's how they became these three mighty warriors, because in these instances, they achieved a great victory single-handedly. That's why they were the three. And then there's this very interesting story about the three in King David. During harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief warriors came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem, David's hometown. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." Gee, surely there was water available where David stood. What's so special about this water from Bethlehem? Well, it's kind of like if you there are times when, if you think about it, each of us has get these little nostalgic moments. And maybe, it sure would be fun to go back go back to my hometown here, go back to the soda fountain and have them make me a cherry Coke. Well, hey, you can pick up cherry Coke in a variety of ways at the local HEB. What's so special about getting a cherry Coke at that soda fountain in your hometown? Well, it's not more than just the cherry Coke. It's all the memories that are associated with that cherry Coke. It's just something, when you start thinking about it, especially if you're going through all sorts of situations right now surrounding about you, it's kind of like like comfort food. It's a comfort feeling. And that's one reason why we refer to certain items that we love as comfort food, because it's more than just the food. It's more than just the nutrition, more than the surface vitamins and so forth that they bring. It's the memories that are associated with that particular item that are comforting. It brings you a feeling of peace. Yeah, you can buy that item, go down and get it at the shelf at your local grocery store, but that's not the point. It's that special item that came from a special location that's very, very near and dear to you. This is what David's going through right now. Oh man, I just remember that those cold drinks water I used to get from the local well in Bethlehem. Man, there was just nothing else like that. If I could only have a drink of water from the well at Bethlehem. Well, the mighty three said, "Consider it done." That's what they do. Verse 16. So the three mighty warriors broke through the Philistine lines. Remember that be yeah, you can try getting to the well, but it's surrounded by an enemy garrison. What you gonna do? Well, no problem for the three. They break through that garrison, through the Philistine lines. They drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and they carried it back to David, where he drank it. Oh, no. In fact, he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. Now, I can't read this story without at least this little thought going through my head that says, if that were me, if I had just put my life on the line to go get David a drink of water from his home well, and all he does is pour it out on the ground, I would be a tad upset. David, why did you do that? I didn't bring that water all the way back for you, just pour it out. I wanted you to drink it. Well, David explains. Far be it from me, Lord, to do this. David said, is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives? David has had time to think about this long drink of water that he otherwise could just, give me 3 seconds and it's down the hatch. This is more than a drink of water. Yeah, I really appreciate it, you guys. I really love what you did for me. But what if things had gone badly? What if you had died in the process of getting this water and bringing it back? What if just one of you had died? This is more than just water. This really would have been in so many ways the blood sacrifice of you and anyone else who died in the process trying to get that water for me. This changes the whole aspect of what this water is all about. This is not just another drink of water. This is something that needs to be treated with the utmost respect. Yeah, he poured it on the ground, but the reason he poured it on the ground was he offered it as a sacrifice to God. David is saying, this water's too good for me just to have a drink of water and satisfy my thirst, satisfy whatever is going through my head right now. This water has been elevated by the very fact of what these men have done and to risk their lives to bring it back for me. This is a sacrifice that's only good for the Lord. So this is how and why I deal with this particular water. David didn't drink it. Such were the exploits of the three mighty warriors. And then the writer goes on to mention a few other valiant men, because we know, we have seen the names of specific individuals who came to David's aid and sometimes rescue. Abishai, the brother of Joab, son of Zeruiah, another member of the family, another nephew of David's, was chief of the three. The three appointed a boss among themselves. Well, there is a boss of the boss. This was Abishai, who was their supervisor. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed, and so he became as famous as the three. Was he not held in greater honor in the three? I guess so. He became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Yeah, he was their boss, but when you talk about the mighty men, when you talk about the big three didn't turn into the four. Remember, we all remember the three musketeers who became the four musketeers. It didn't become the mighty four. It was just Abishai who supervised the mighty three. And then there was Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, performed great exploits. He struck down Moab's two mightiest warriors. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. Now, if that isn't brave, I don't know what is. Go down into a pit. Hey, there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Lions not the tamest thing. They're not like pets. I mean, it was either him or the lion. One of them was going to get killed. So basically, he said, Benaniah says, "Hey, might as well be me who survives this." So he kills the lion, and he struck down a huge Egyptian. Although the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaniah went against him with a club. The equivalent of apparently of bringing a knife to a gunfight. Maybe, hey, common sense would say, you're a little bit not matched evenly here in the weapons category. Apparently, Benaniah did not get the memo. Goes to this spear fight with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaniah, son of Jehoiada. He too was as famous as the three mighty warriors. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30. Maybe he got a lifetime subscription of Reader's Digest or something. Not sure what the greater honor was. Apparently couldn't have been that much because he was not included among the three. The three which did not become the four, certainly did not become the five. They stayed the three with these two extra guys. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard for a good reason. Hey, anyone who's brave enough to go kill a lion in a pit on a snowy day, that's a brave guy. And then the rest of the chapter has this list of people who served with the 30. If you love the way I mangled the names of some of these individuals, you're just going to love how I try to pronounce some of these names, so I ain't going to do it. I will leave that to your very capable hands to go through this list, because it would just, it would be too long, too painful, and maybe a little too boring. There are a couple of names I will point out because the fact that they're in here is significant, maybe a little ironic. Look at verse 34. The second name in that verse is Eliam, son of Ahithophel the Gilonite. Gee, we may be familiar with at least one of those names, Ahithophel. Would that be Ahithophel, the smartest man in Israel, the counselor to David and to kings in general? Yeah, that would be him. And he had a son who served as part of David's brave warriors, Eliam. Eliam, as we know, had a family. He had a daughter. Does anyone remember the name of that daughter? Bathsheba. We all know what happened between Bathsheba and David. And that brings us to the last name in this list in verse 39, Uriah the Hittite. Gee. Now, if there was someone who was very, 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 very loyal to David to a fault, who would say, we need to clean up David's mistakes in this biography. So we got to make a few things, a few incidents, maybe a few names go away. Yeah, and they just punch the delete button when you come up on Eliam and Ahithophel and Uriah, and those guys would just disappear from the collective memory. Well, God doesn't work that way. These were individuals that served with David. and were loyal to David. And in some cases, they were more loyal to David than David was to them. And so God does the right thing here. He says, we're not, yes, I love David and I honor David, but I'm not going to allow other righteous men to pay for David's mistakes. So the names stay in the list. It gives you some kind of a better understanding of the relationship between and among these men. It may help explain why, when there was rebellion against David, Mr. Ahithophel decided, hey, I'll throw in with the guy who wants to overthrow David, because I really despise the way he made a mockery of my granddaughter, and he killed my granddaughter's husband. Yeah, I can't wait to do a little turnaround here at the right moment, at what seems to be a can't lose moment, especially now that his son is rebelling against him. So that may explain why Ahithophel threw in with Absalom. Hey, it's payback time, and I'm just going to sit back and smile and see the payback take place. Didn't work out that way. We all know what happened to Ahithophel. But that is a laundry list of the brave men who served with David and protected David during his reign. And then we come to chapter 24, which is a very interesting article or story here, because it begins with, again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited David against them, saying, go and take a census of Israel and Judah. Now, why would David want to take a census of Israel and Judah? Well, obviously, hey, I want to know how many people are here. And specifically, I want to know how many soldiers I got in my army. Well, gee, I guess that's not a bad thing, right? But we're talking about serving a God who sees himself as your first line and first and only line of defense, where numbers really don't amount to that much. Hey, David, if you really want to know something about how numbering of your mighty men and how many forces you got fighting for you, it's not all that important at the end of the day. If you're wondering about that, if you doubt that, go back and read the story of Gideon. Gee, how many men did he take at my direction to overthrow the enemy? Only 300 out of tens of thousands. God deliberately slims down Gideon's fighting force, and they win the battle decisively. To prove the point, I am your defense. I am your protector. You don't need to worry about how many fighting men you got, because I am your protector. I am your army. I am your absolute defense. You don't need to worry. Well, that's the case if David is provoking the wrath of God by going out and conducting this census. Why does it read here that to appear that God plants the idea in David's head? Well, maybe. Let's look at an alternate narrative. There is a corollary passage about this in 1 Chronicles chapter 21. And it kind of sort of reads the same way, but not quite, almost, but not quite. Because it doesn't say that God incited David to do this. It says that Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel. So that, the thing to remember about any kind of translation, and we've had wonderful people with God's guidance who have translated the Bible so we can read it. We don't have to read it in the original Hebrew or Greek or whatever. But any translation has little moments of impreciseness, and this may be one of them. That the real agent that plants the idea in David's head is not God, but Satan. Why does Satan want to do it? Well, he knows how God feels about these things. This may have been a moment during David's career where he's getting a little bit full of himself. He's getting a little bit self-confident. Yes, he loves God. Yes, he knows everything that God does for him. But he's starting to look at life and look at his success as, I did that. I helped do that. I am so good. And look at all the things that have happened under my administration. Well, God perhaps allows this moment for David to listen to an idea that's planted in his head. Hey, David, it's been a while since you counted your fighting men. Why don't you go do that? And David in his head says, that's a darn good idea. Joab, you go out and count the troops. And that's exactly what he says in verse 2. Go throughout the tribes of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. That's their way of saying go from coast to coast. Go through the entire nation of Israel. Enroll the fighting men so I may know how many there are. I really, really, really want to know, Joab, so go do it. But Joab replied, and we know, Joab has more than a few rough edges around him, right? He's done some not so cool things in his career, but he has these moments of talking sense. And this is one of them. Verse 3, Joab replied to the king, may the Lord your God multiply the troops 100 times over, and may the eyes of my lord the king see it. But why does my lord the king want to do such a thing? Even Joab knows it's not a good idea to go out and count the troops. If God hasn't told you to do it, don't do it. And you're doing it, uncle. Why get the Lord mad at you? Well, that argument goes nowhere. Verse 4, the king's word, however, overruled Joab and the army commanders. So they left the presence of the king to enroll the fighting men of Israel. After crossing the Jordan, they camped near Aroer, south of the town in the gorge, and went through Gad and on to Jazer. They went to Gilead and the region of Tadim Hadsi, and on to Dan, Jian, and around towards Sidon. Then they went toward the fortress of Tyre and all the towns of the Hivites and the Canaanites. Finally, they went on to Beersheba and the Negev of Judah. They went everywhere, man. Crossed the Delaware, like that old country song. Just popped in my head. Sorry about that. In fact, that's what verse 8 says. After they had gone through the entire land, they came back to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months, 20 days. Better part of a year, 3 seasons, long enough, more than enough time for some sense to go into David's head and say, this is a dumb thing. I shouldn't be doing it. Let's call the whole thing off. Nope. They go through the whole exercise. And verse 9, Joab reports the number of the fighting men to the king. In Israel, there were 800,000 able-bodied men who could handle a sword. Israel here meaning the region that's controlled by the 10 tribes of Israel. And then in Judah, 500,000. 1.3 million fighting men in all. Based on this figure, a lot of commentators come back and say, well, total population in Israel about that time had to be about 5 to 6 million people. Pretty much triple what they were when they crossed into the promised land. Slightly different figures in the First Chronicles account. In First Chronicles, according to First Chronicles, the tribes of Israel had 1.1 million fighting men. Judah, 470,000 for a total of 1,570,000 soldiers total. Take your pick. Doesn't really matter. What really matters is what happens afterward. Verse 10, David's conscience finally kicks in. David's heart condemned him, according to one translation, how it reads. After he'd counted the fighting men, and he said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. Now, Lord, I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I've done a very foolish thing. a really, really good prayer of repentance. And God answers it. Because before David got up the next morning, the word of the Lord had come to Gad the prophet, David's seer. Go and tell David, this is what the Lord says. I am giving you 3 options. Choose one of them for me and carry out against you. This is kind of like a nightmare version of Let's Make a Deal, where you have the show host stand up in front of 3 curtains. Curtain number 1, curtain number 2, curtain number 3. Which one? Yeah, let's tell us which one you want us to open. Kind of like that. Gad went to David and said to him, shall there come on you 3 years of famine? Some translations, that's 7 years. I kind of like the 3 because you got a whole bunch of 3s here. 3 years of famine in your land, or 3 months of fleeing from your enemies while they pursue you, or 3 days of plague in your land. Now then, think it over and decide how I should answer the one to sent me. Here's the menu. Pick your punishment. Gee, I don't know if that's a gift. I don't know if that's a choice I want to make, And David thinks it over. And the first 2, yeah, they last much longer. But maybe David is thinking, you know what? Whatever the outcome of those first 2 situations are like, they'll fall on the people of Israel and probably not on me. Hey, 3 years of famine, we got plenty of food in the palace. I can sustain that. The other folks, especially the poor folks, maybe not so much. A lot of people die because there's no food in the land. 3 months of fleeing from your enemies. In other words, we go through another let's run from Absalom moment where we're on the run. That's no fun. Again, I have an armed guard that would take care of me, but who knows what would happen again to the people of Israel while that was going on, if only for three months. 3 days of plague, not any less fun because we know what can happen very quickly. This is kind of sensitive for us because we just came through the COVID thing. Those little microorganisms are no respecter of people. And maybe that's what David was thinking. If Israel's being punished, I deserve to be affected by this punishment. Yes. And all of us, yes. And so, the simplest, fairest thing when David decides is, in fact, probably the deciding factor is the first 2 choices involve actions by men. And we know what could happen in situations where human thinking is involved. What starts may not necessarily end at a very inviting place. It'll just keep going and going and going. If you're running out of food, or you're on the run from enemy warriors, enemy bandits, and so forth, you're going to see very horrible examples of man's inhumanity to man. David? Yes, there will be death, no doubt. I may survive because I'm protected, but my people may not, and a lot of my people may not, and it may not stop an appropriate point, depending on how long it goes on. The only choice here is to place myself in God's hands. So that's what that's what he decides. He doesn't necessarily make a choice so much as he gives it back to God. He says, I'm in deep distress. Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but do not let me fall into human hands. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel from that morning until the end of time designated. 70,000 of the people nationwide from Dan to Beersheba died. When the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, the Lord relented concerning the disaster and said to the angel who was afflicting the people, enough, You withdraw your hand. And the angel of the Lord was then at the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. Is that significant? Yes. We'll read on. When David saw the angel who was striking down the people, he said to the Lord, I've sinned. I, the shepherd, have done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall on me and my family. Lord, if there's a further price to be paid for what I've done, I will pay it. And David will pay in a way, as we find out. On that day, Gad went to David and said to him, Go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. David went up as the Lord commanded through Gad. When Araunah looked and saw the king and his officials coming toward him, he went out and bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and asked, Why has my lord the king come to his servant? To buy your threshing floor. David answered, So I can build an altar to the Lord, that the plague on the people may be stopped. What's this big deal about the threshing floor? Well, we all know what a threshing floor is for. It's to separate the wheat from the chaff that's come in from the harvest. To get to those wonderful kernels of wheat, you have to break through these protective kernels called chaff, which are inedible and non-nutritious at all. So, first of all, you get a team of oxen or a big rolling stone, and you grind and stomp on the grain until the grain is indeed separated from the chaff. It breaks open. And then you get some kind of shovel, and you start digging into the pile of stuff, and you start swinging it up into the air. And the higher the location of the threshing floor, and here it's on top of this mount, which we've learned turns out to be Mount Moriah, the wind catches the grain and blows away the chaff. And that's how you get your wheat kernels that you can use for food. So, David wants to buy this threshing floor and build an altar. Good idea to Araunah. In fact, he is happy enough, hey, you need this, sir? You take it, free of charge. Take whatever you wish and offer it up. Here are oxen for the burnt offering, and here are threshing sledges and ox yokes for the wood. Your Majesty, Araunah gives all this to the king. Araunah also said to him, May the Lord your God accept you. But King David replied to him, No, I insist on paying you for it. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. I appreciate your open heart, your generous heart, but I got to pay you something for it, because if I just accept it as a gift, it's not a sacrifice on my part, and this needs to be a sacrificial offering. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen and paid 50 shekels, about 1.25 pounds of silver, for them. He built an altar to the Lord, and there sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Lord answered his prayer on behalf of the land, and the plague on Israel was stopped. Why is this significant? Because of the location of the threshing floor where the altar was built. Mount Moriah. Have we heard of Mount Moriah before? Yeah, kind of, sort of. Look back in Genesis when God commanded Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, offer him as a sacrifice, that is. Where did they go to do the deed? Mount Moriah, or in the region of Moriah on a mountain. Very likely this mountain. And now you have this sacrifice here, this altar of sacrifice to stop the plague. Another episode where an altar of sacrifice is located. Look down the road, and this is not a certainty, this is a guess among most Bible commentators, but they say, you know what? When the people came back and Jerusalem was rebuilt and repopulated and so forth, this mountain, which was to the outside of the city and the city gates, became Golgotha, or Calvary. I'm sorry. I always get those pronunciations mixed up. And we all know the significance of Calvary. Now, that's just a guess, but there are several Bible commentators who say this is where Jesus was crucified, where the ultimate sacrifice was made. And it's on this that the book of 2 Samuel comes to an end and kind of leaves you in a lurch of, gee, isn't there more here? Well, next Sunday, I'm going to play Paul Harvey, and I'm going to offer what Paul Harvey would call the rest of the story. We're going to wrap up some of these loose ends that are left at the end of the narrative of 1st and 2nd Samuel. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I hope you get something out of it. Hope you have a good week. Pray for rain. Continue to pray for rain, not for floods, but we can use more rain. And Lord willing, we'll be back here next Sunday. Thank you very much.